Well, good evening, Kenmore Church. Technical difficulties aside. My name is Liam. I have the blessing of being one of the ministry team here at Kenmore. And is it not just awesome that we get to celebrate baptism together? Like, how good is it when God moves in people's lives and we get to hear people's testimonies? And well done, George. I did kind of throw her in the last minute and say, hey, you're going to be on stage in all the lights, with all the pomp of it all. She thought she was going to be giving a testimony in the pool, so really good job there. All right, so look, if you've got your Bible with you, church, and I hope you do, we're going to be in Psalm chapter 23 tonight. Psalm chapter 23, as we jump into the second week of a series called Sing a New Song. And look, honestly, this psalm is the real deal. Like, besides the Lord's Prayer, it is probably one of the most well-known, well-recited, well-memorized verses in all of the whole Bible. That even if you're new to Bible study, you probably know this passage. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul to me. He leads me in paths of righteousness, even for his own name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil thing. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. And surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It's a psalm we all know. It's a psalm we all love. And look, like, just for me personally, this psalm means a whole lot to me. You see, for those of you who don't know, I've got a little baby, Samuel. He's about 9 months old at this point, and he has not slept, like, at all from day dot. And it's just the season of life we're in. We're walking through it. We're getting there. We're struggling and surviving on caffeine and prayer, so we're getting there. But for the first 6 months of Samuel's life, I prayed and sang Psalm 23 over him as I was holding him in my arms, trying to get him to sleep. It didn't work that well, but I now know the psalm memorized. I actually memorized it according to the Scottish Psalter, which is the tune of Amazing Grace. So I apologize if I get the words mixed up as I'm going through, but that is what is ringing through my head as I'm reading this. That, church, this psalm has been a comfort to the afflicted. It has been peace to believers on their deathbed and assurance and consolation for those left behind for the last 3,000 years. This psalm is the real thing. And yet, honestly, church, I actually think a lot of the time we sort of misunderstand what this psalm is about. That despite the fact that it's one of the most well-known psalms, it's probably also one of the most misunderstood psalms as well. And the reason I think that is twofold. So firstly, I just think we don't get the context. I mean, anyone will put their hand up and say, I've been a shepherd, been there, done that? No takers? Well, I have never been a shepherd. I've never herded sheep. I've never fought off bears and lions with my bare hands. And you know what? The whole Jedi robe thing with a staff, not really my deal. I have never been a shepherd. And what that means, and I assume the same is true for each and every one of you, is we're actually completely separated from the context this psalm is being spoken into. The author of Psalm 23 is King David, and even though he probably wrote this towards the end of his life, he knows what it means to be a shepherd. He's been there, done that. The first 20 years of his life, he was looking after sheep and making them lie down by green pastures and by still waters. He understands the context. And so, look, I've done the hard work for you this week. I listened to a whole bunch of sermons on Psalm 23, and in every single one of them, they mentioned a book. And the name of the book is A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. And as you can guess, that book was written by a real-life, bona fide shepherd. His name is Philip Keller. No relation to the late, great Tim Keller. But he lived as a shepherd. He did that for 8 years. He lived in rural Africa looking after sheep in a very similar context to what Psalm 23 is speaking into. And he just unpacks these verses verse by verse and just speaks into the context of what this actually looks like from a shepherd's perspective. And honestly, church, there is just a wealth of insight buried in this psalm that we get as we look through it through that looking glass. But the second reason we misunderstand this chapter, and this is probably the more important one, is honestly, we make it all about ourselves. That we go like, the Lord is my shepherd. I get to lie down in green pastures. My cup runneth over. That sounds like a pretty good deal for me. But see, church, the truth of the matter is the whole point of this psalm is it's all about God. It's all about who he is and his character and how he chooses to relate to us. That there are 8 activities that take place in this psalm, and God is the active agent in all but one of them. He makes us lie down. He leads us to still waters. He restores our soul. He leads us in paths of righteousness. He comforts us. He prepares the table. He anoints our head. Church, all we do is walk through the valley of the shadow of evil or shadow of death. And if that doesn't say something about our relationship with God and how good he is, I don't know what else would. The church, this psalm is all about God. And so look, as we jump into the second week in a series about worship and what it looks like for us to grow in our experience of worship, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm not going to talk a whole lot about singing. I'm not going to really go in depth about what worship is and why we sing songs and when we should raise our hands and when it's appropriate to dance in church. Although if you're going to be biblical there, the answer there is if you're in your underwear, see King David. But no, all the recovering Baptists in the room can rest easy tonight. Because I'm not going to talk about worship. Instead, I'm going to talk a whole lot about God. Who he is, how he relates to us, what it means for him to be shepherd and us to be sheep. And again, the reason I'm going to do that is because right worship comes as a right response to a right understanding of God. And so if we want to grow in our experience of worship, that means we need to start by having a better understanding of who God is. And so just to give you the takeaway right from the start, this is the point of tonight's message. Because God is a good shepherd, we can worship him in every and any situation. Whether we are sitting in fields of green or walking through the valley of the shadow of death, God is worthy of worship. So if you got your Bible with you, Psalm chapter 23, verse 1, Psalm 23, a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd. All right, let me stop there. So where it says capital L-O-R-D there in the Bible, that's just the Bible's way of saying, hey, in the original language, that's not the word Lord in Hebrew. It's actually the covenant name of God, Yahweh. Yahweh is my shepherd. That when God met Moses at the burning bush and said, Moses, I am going to set my people free and I'm going to use you, Moses' response to that was, well, who should I say is sending me? And God said, tell them Yahweh is sending you, the great I am. And see, what happens immediately after that is God just moves in incredible power. He visits the 10 plagues upon Egypt. He parts the Red Sea. His spirit falls upon Mount Sinai like a fiery storm. That this name, church, the name of Yahweh, the Lord, it is a name associated with immense power and authority throughout the Bible. And throughout the book of Psalms, David and the other psalmists, they do use powerful language to describe who God is and how we can relate to him. God is described as king and we as his subjects. He's described as a good father and we the sons, a potter shaping the clay with his hands. He's described as a shield of protection for the weak, a refuge to hide under, a great and mighty judge standing in judgment over us. But here in Psalm 23, King David doesn't use any of that language. He doesn't go for the great mighty king of the universe, even though that is who God is. He says, no, the Lord is my shepherd. He is my personal, intimate carer, provider, healer, comforter, rescuer, and watcher. The church, God could just be sovereign king of the universe, but instead he chooses to relate to us as our shepherd. And you know what that makes us, church? That makes us sheep. And you don't even realize how much of an insult that actually is when the Bible calls us sheep. See, the problem is you've all been to Coorong too many times, right? Because what I've discovered, and I don't know if it's just an Australia thing or whatever, but every time you visit Coorong, there's at least one wall with like a poster of Shepherd Jesus. And you know, it's blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Swedish Jesus, white as anything with like long, straight hair, no split ends. And he's there in like a perfect, sparkling white robe, and he's got his purple Miss America sash on, and he's holding like a little spotless, tiny lamb. And we look at that and we go, oh, that's me. Church, have you ever actually seen a sheep? Sheep are dirty, that they smell, that they're as dumb as anything, and honestly, they've got no real survival instincts to speak of at all. That every other animal in the animal kingdom, they can either do like fight or flight. That either they're really fast, or they can run, or they can fly, or jump, whatever it is to get away from the prey, or else they have some sort of survival mechanism. Teeth, claws, something to get the prey, get the predators off of them. Sheep have none of that. In fact, they're actually covered in Velcro so that any animal trying to get them has like a good grip on them while they like eat their face off. Okay, how's this for a story? In 2005, in Turkey, 26 shepherding communities came together for like a big gathering. I don't know, like a sheep convention. And they all put all their sheep in like a field, and they left them there, and they went off to go have breakfast. And they came back to a line of sheep jumping off a cliff, one at a time. And I'll just... Oh, I didn't put the quote in. But essentially what happened is one sheep had jumped off the cliff, and all the other sheep looked at it and went, you know what? If it's safe for him, it must be safe for us. And so they formed an orderly queue, and one at a time jumped off, and like by the end of it, there were 450 dead sheep in like a massive pile. The cost was something like $100,000 to those shepherds. And church, God looks at that, and he goes, you know what that reminds me of? My children. Me and you. That Philip Keller, the shepherd, writes in his book, sheep do not just take care of themselves, as some might suppose. They require, more than any other class of livestock, endless attention and meticulous care. At church, over 200 times in the Bible, we are called sheep. And the only time it's ever portrayed in a positive light is when we are sitting under the care of a good shepherd. So look, before we go anywhere tonight, can I just ask you, is that how you relate to God? Is he your shepherd? See, last week, for those who weren't here, I talked about the fact that the way we relate to God will determine how we worship him. That A.W. Tozer says the most important thing about you is what you think about when you think about God. So do you think about God being like a good shepherd? Do you think about him being the one who provides for you and protects you and looks after you and leads you in all the right ways, even though you're just a really dumb sheep? And look, just to bring it back to worship for a second, you can worship God as just sovereign king of the universe. And if you come back over the next couple of weeks, we'll talk into what that looks like. But church, when you worship God as shepherd, it just hits a little bit different. That there is a real sense of personal care, affection, and trust found in that relationship. Because you're not saying, I've got it all together. You're not saying, I'm a really, really good sheep. You're saying, God, even though I am broken, you're the good shepherd. That you will provide for me, you will protect me, you will care for me in the way only a shepherd can. And look, if you don't view God as a shepherd, honestly, nothing I'm going to say for the next 35 minutes is going to make any sense. And God makes it easy for us. There's no tryouts. There's no sheep competition. You just have to go to him and say, Lord, will you be my shepherd? All right, so now that we've positioned ourselves correctly and we understand what sheep do and what the shepherd does, all I'm going to do is just walk through how this relationship plays out. And really, we're going to be presented with two different seasons of being a sheep. The season of green pastures and the season of the valley of the shadow of death. And again, our goal is to walk through that and see how, because of who God is, we can worship him in either situation. All right, so the Lord is my shepherd, therefore I shall not want. And look, honestly, I don't think that's a great translation in modern English. Really, it should be more like, I shall not be in want. The King James probably has it a little bit better. It says, I shall not need. The word in Hebrew is chesed. It means to have lack or be without. And look, honestly, if we're just talking here, I think we can all agree we want some stuff, right? Like each and every one of us, we want certain things in our life. And some of that is like right and good stuff for us to want. Like it is right that I want each and every one of you to grow in your faith. It is right that I want Samuel to grow up knowing God. It is right that I want the Springboks to win every single rugby championship every single year. But church, we live in a world that spends billions of dollars every day convincing you that you want some stuff, that you need some stuff. And if you don't believe me, just go to the shops right now, and what you'll see is there are both Halloween decorations and Christmas decorations in the shop at the same time. And both are trying to convince you that you need to grab some more stuff for yourself so that you can feel better about yourself because the last stuff didn't do it for you. I mean, honestly, that's basically how advertising works, right? I mean, have you seen a car ad lately? Well, what they show is like a happy family with a whole bunch of kids and a dog, and they're all in the car and they're going to the beach. And you know it's fake because no one's ever really that happy when you go to the beach, right? Like what has actually happened is there are like 3 kids like covered in mud and dirt, the dog's off the leash and it's in the ocean running away, and the mom's just yelling at everyone trying to bring them back in. But they don't show that, right? They show a bunch of happy, clean kids, a dog sitting there wagging their tail, and then they all jump in the air and go your own way. Why? Because they're not trying to convince you that you want the car. They're trying to convince you that you need the car. That somehow the car will fundamentally change everything about everything in your life. It'll fix or your marital problems and your family issues and give you the life of adventure you've always wanted. The church, the world will try to get you to want and need some stuff. But the truth of the matter is we're not made to be satisfied with the stuff of this world. We're just not. I mean, you ever get that thing called buyer's remorse? When you spend like hours and hours like doing all the research and having a spreadsheet and you go to all the like different comparison websites, and then at the end you finally buy it and you save up the money and you bring it home, and then 2 days later it's like, it's just more stuff in my room. Church, we're not made to want the stuff of this world. We're made to want God. That C.S. Lewis says in Mere Christianity, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If nothing of my earthly pleasures can satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud, but it shows me that earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy that desire. The church were made to want and need God. And see, what David is not saying here is he's not saying like, I'll never have desires again. I'll never have any material needs in my life again. No, what he's saying is regardless of the situation, I shall be content with the shepherd's care. That because I find my satisfaction in him and him alone, I will not crave the things of this world. And look, honestly, I don't know who needs to hear this tonight. But if you're here and you feel discontent with your situation, which according to the latest ABS stats is like at an all-time high. So if you feel discontent, the answer will not be found in another car or another promotion or another holiday or another girlfriend or how good you look in the mirror or the next renovation. It will only be found in the Good Shepherd. That Paul gets this idea. He says this in Philippians chapter 4, I do not speak of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation that I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. How, Paul? How can you get to that point? For I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That church contentment will only be found in trusting the Good Shepherd to provide for you. All right, verse 2. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. All right, church, I don't know if you realize this, but sheep do not lie down easily. In Philip Keller's book, he talks about the fact that unless the circumstances are perfect, a sheep will never lay down, even if it is sitting in the greenest pastures you can imagine. That unless they are free from fear, friction with other sheep, flies, and they are a lack of food, unless they have all those things met, fear, friction, flies, and food, they will not lie down. And even then, the shepherd often still has to make them lie down where they are. And church, can I just say, we have a good God who loves us enough that he would actually make us lie down. That he would come to us and say, hey, these things are better for you. My way of life is better, and I'm actually going to make you do this. I'm going to tell you to do this because it's actually for your good. Even when we don't want to do that thing. That he would make us lie down. He would make us keep things like Sabbath and rest well. He would tell us to balance our lives and our work, our family, our church in such a way that we can do all of them better. That God would love us enough that he would lead us to green pastures and by still waters. That he would guide us in what is good for us and what is not good for us. What is life-giving and what is poisonous. And ultimately, God would love us enough that he would actually restore our souls. And that phrase literally just means he would bring us back to life. He would return our lives to us. And honestly, as I was going through this week and reading through Philip Keller's book, well, what just became abundantly clear to me is the good shepherd knows what's good for us. And a lot of the time, we don't. See, the reason the shepherd has to make them lie down in green pastures is because sheep are one of the few animals that cannot consistently distinguish between poison and food. That left to their own desires, they will wander up to weeds which are poisonous and will kill them, and they'll eat them anyway. Church, can you believe there is a creature so dumb that it would willfully put harmful substances into its body again and again? The reason he has to lead them to still waters is because what will happen is if the shepherd takes them to running waters, the sheep will become enamored by the sun glinting off the water. And they'll put their head in, and because of the moving water, their fur will get soaked and get pulled in, and they will drown. Church, can you believe there is an animal so dumb that it will take a good gift from God and saturate itself in it to the point where it actually harms itself? And the reason the shepherd has to take them along paths of righteousness, literally in Hebrew, the right paths, the correct paths, is because there are wrong paths a sheep can walk. Philip Keller writes, sheep are notorious creatures of habit. If left to themselves, they will follow the same trails again and again until they become ruts. They will graze the same hills until those hills turn to deserts. They will pollute their own ground until it is corrupt with disease and parasites. That sheep can walk the same path so many times that what will happen is there'll be a trail of excrement all along that path. And the next time they come around on that path again, they will eat it, and again, they'll die. Church, can you believe there is an animal so dumb that it would do the same harmful thing to itself again and again and again, simply out of habit? And if you think we're still talking about sheep, we're not, church. See, God has a way of living set out for us. And honestly, it is just better. And just as a good shepherd, he comes into our lives and he says, hey, sheep, let me make you lie down. Let me show you the green pastures. Let me show you what is harmful and what is good. Let me show you my way of doing life. Because I love you. Because I care for you. The church, if you let him, God will provide for your needs. Not your wants, not your desires, but he will provide for everything you need. And I'm going to try at least make some sort of link back to worship here because this is a series about worship. But honestly, I think for some of you, where you are tonight, like, this is you. You're doing life and it just feels great right now. That you look around you and it is like green pastures and still waters. That the boundary lines have fallen for you in pleasant places. And can I just say, if that is you tonight, I'm so grateful that that is your situation. Like, I just praise God that you find yourself in that sort of position. Because honestly, I think sometimes as Christians, we sort of get embarrassed when life goes well. Like, if we're not living a life of misery and suffering, then somehow we don't have a good testimony. I mean, that's what George spoke about tonight, the fact that she didn't feel like she had a good testimony because somehow it's a bad thing or an embarrassing thing to live in the heritage of God moving in powerful ways and blessing generation upon generation upon generation. Church, that's not a bad testimony. That is the testimony each and every one of us want the next generation to have. Church, it is a good testimony when you can say, you know what? I look at my life right now, and though I did not deserve it or earn it, God has poured out blessing upon blessing upon blessing in my life. More than I could ever ask, think, or imagine. And so if that is you tonight, church, your response to that, your response to the Good Shepherd in the fields of green, it should be worship. It should be turning back to the one who gave you the gifts, and not just because of the gifts, but because of who he is. You turn to him and you praise him. You make much of him. The church, we can worship God in green pastures and by still waters because every blessing is the shepherd's provision. And honestly, I think that's why David finishes with the line in this section that it's all for the sake of your name. That God, all of this blessing, all this goodness you have given me, it is for your name's sake. It's all to your glory. It's all for your reputation. It's all just to show the world how good a God you are. And look, in a second, we'll get to the other side of the spectrum when life is not going well. But church, when life is good, our response should be worship. All right, verse 4. And just a heads up, there's going to be a real change of mood here. Because what you think David's going to do is he's going to say, and if you just keep on following the shepherd, life gets better and better and better, and it's all like sunshine and candy from that day on. But he doesn't go there. Because church, that's not the way life goes either. That verse 4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. But church, sometimes life doesn't look like green pastures and still waters. Sometimes life looks like the valley of the shadow of death. And look, honestly, David is speaking from experience here, right? Like, commentators argue over exactly when David wrote this psalm, but I think he's writing this at the end of his life. And he's reflecting back on like a lifetime of walking with the Good Shepherd. And honestly, if that is the perspective you take, if you look at David's life, he walked through some real valleys, church. See, maybe what David is reflecting on here is the time when Saul tried to kill him. That his Lord and Master and King threw a spear at his head while David was trying to worship in order to ease Saul's headache. And because of that, David spends the next 15 years of his life on the run, hiding in caves, away from the people he cares most about. Or maybe David's reflecting on the time back in Ziklag, where he came back from a hard day's work and he came back to his house on fire, all of his possessions stolen, and his wives dragged off by his enemies. And the Bible just says in response to that, David wept until he had no more strength to weep. Or maybe it's when David self-sabotaged his own life and family, and he set his eyes on Bathsheba, a woman who was married and was not his wife, and he committed adultery with her. And if that wasn't bad enough, he then tried to cover it up by murdering her husband. And David thinks it's going really well, like he's gotten away with it, but then Nathan comes up to him, the prophet, and says, "Hey, David, I know what you've done. You're this man who's taken something precious from someone that it did not belong to you." Church, that sounds a lot like a valley of the shadow of death to me. Or maybe, and they don't teach you this one at Sunday school, maybe he's talking about the time his daughter got raped by one of his sons. And then that son, another son murdered that son, and then that son went on, his name was Absalom, and he ended up, he had a whole rebellion against David, and David spent more years of his life on the run, in the wild, because his own son tried to overthrow him. Church, David has walked through some valleys of the shadow of death. And yet he looks at that. He looks at all those moments of pain and heartache and hurt when nothing made sense, and he just wept his eyes out, and he looks at all of that. And he says, yeah, even then, even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. How, David? How can you do that? Is it just because you were like this really resilient man and you could just push through the pain? Is it because you were really rich and you had enough money in the bank that you could just get through those hard times? Was it because you were just a really, really positive person and you saw every silver lining around the dark clouds? No, he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Church, God is not separate from your suffering. He is not standing apart from your pain. We don't serve a God who stands on the other side of the valley of the shadow of death and says, come on, you can do it, just keep on pushing. Church, we serve a God who gets close and personal and walks with us in the midst of the suffering. The church, we serve a God who understands our pain. I mean, you do realize anything you have ever suffered with in this life, Jesus, the good shepherd, he's already been there. That Jesus was betrayed by his closest friend. He was rejected by his family. He was falsely accused of crimes he did not commit. He had prayers that went unanswered. He had nights of loneliness and rejection. He knew agony and pain, the burden of guilt and shame, even though they were not his own. He wept over the death of a friend. He experienced hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. And church, on the cross, Jesus even felt as though God was away from him. Church, we do not have a God who does not understand our pain. And what that means is we do not have to suffer alone. That when life hurts, when nothing makes sense, we can yell out to the winds and the rain and say, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me, God. And look, if you're paying attention to the pronouns in this verse, which I know you all do every time you read the Bible, what you'll see has actually happened here is that David has switched the grammatical person. That up to this point, when everything was fine and dandy, he spoke in the third person. But the second it shifts gears and he's walking through the valley of the shadow of death, he goes to first person. And the reason he does that, church, is because when you go through the valley of death, you don't just talk about God. You talk to him. See, honestly, some of you right now, you're not in green pastures and by still waters. If you look at your life, you are in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death. That the pain of life just keeps hitting you again and again and again. And church, if that is you tonight, can I just say, please, 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 don't just talk about God. Don't just say the Bible verses and say, this is what it's supposed to be like. Turn and talk to God. Stop talking about his goodness and grace and mercy and fall on your knees before your good heavenly Father and plead that he would show you those attributes in your life. Like, maybe you're here tonight and you lost a loved one. And again, you know all the Bible verses. You know all the prayers you're supposed to pray and the things you're supposed to say, but you come to church week after week and you put on this fake smile and you laugh the fake laugh, but honestly inside it, you're just broken and hurting inside. And you're just like, God, of all the people you could have taken away, why did it have to be that one? Or maybe you're here tonight and the person you were going to do life with for the rest of your life, well, you're here right now and they're not. And it makes no sense. Because you prayed over that relationship. And you did all the right things. And you just feel like you're going to be alone for the rest of your life. Or maybe you're here tonight and it's like depression. And again, I think sometimes depression is like the worst because good-meaning Christians will come up to you and they'll say things like, well, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And have you cast your burdens upon him? And honestly, you've tried that again and again and again, but it's like no matter how often you pray or how often you worship or whatever you do, you just can't turn the happy on inside. Church, if that is you tonight and you are hurting and life sucks and you don't understand, firstly, do not do it alone. please, please, please do not isolate yourself in your time of pain. That is not the way we're supposed to do that as the body of Christ. And I know we've got a whole bunch of guests here tonight, and if you don't call Kenmore your home, that is fine. This will always be a place where God's people can come here, and they can find comfort, and they can find fellowship, and we will look after you. But secondly, church, please don't hide your pain from God. That the worst possible response you could ever have to walking through the valley of the shadow of death is to put your hand up to God and say, no, God, I don't want you in the midst of my pain. See, the reason there are Psalms like Psalm 6, where David says, I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. Or Psalm 22, where David says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or how about this Psalm 88, which starts out with the psalmist crying out to God for help, but by the end of it, he says, well, God, you haven't answered, and my companions have become darkness. Church, the reason we have Psalms like that in the Psalms is because real people really felt those real emotions. Instead of pushing them away, instead of hiding and isolating themselves, they turned to God and they poured out their pain in praise and worship to God. And then the Holy Spirit came along and said, yeah, that's good. Write that one down in the Bible. The church, you don't have to be fake with God. A real Jesus went to the real cross to die for the real you. And look, I'll probably get in trouble for this, but if you need to be angry at God, be angry at God. If you need to shout and yell at God, go for it. Honestly, church, if you need to swear in your prayers, just swear away. I think God is big enough that he can handle that and he can deal with it after the fact, but you go to God in your pain. You don't have to be fake. And look, honestly, sometimes that does look like worship. And I don't just say that to like patronizingly put it into a message about worship. But like, if I just look at my life, if I look at the times in my life where I grew most in worship, it wasn't when things were well. It wasn't when I was in green pastures and by still waters. Church, it was when I hurt. It was when people I cared deeply about did things to themselves that hurt them and completely destroyed their lives. It was when relationships completely broke down and the paths that I thought I was walking on just fell apart in front of me, and honestly, it felt like God had abandoned me. See, church, those moments when you have to shut the doors and play the worship music really, really loud so you don't have to hear your own thoughts and you just fall on your knees and worship God through the pain, through the tears, church, that will grow your worship. That we worship God in green pastures because he gives us the blessing, and we worship God in the valley of the shadow of death because he is with us. In verse 5, and the band can come up as we finish this off. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. That David starts to end this psalm and he breaks the rule that every English teacher has instilled in us. He switches metaphors, he mixes his metaphors. And he goes from talking about sheep and shepherds to a host and people coming to a party. But really this verse is saying the exact same thing. That your peace is not found in a person, it's found in a person, not your circumstances. That even when it feels like you're surrounded by enemies, you can still turn to God and say, it is well with my soul. And then verse 6, David finishes off the whole thing and says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That David goes, look, whether I walk in green pastures and by still waters, or through the valley of the shadow of death, whether I'm in the midst of the blessing or the breaking, I will praise my God. I will worship him. And his goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And the word there for mercy is chesed. It means steadfast love, faithful love, the sort of love that you get regardless of your circumstances. And then the only right response David could possibly have to all of that is he just says, well, because of that, I will dwell in the house of God forever. That I'm going to go to church and I'm going to worship God in the midst of God's people, in God's presence. And one day I will step into eternity and I will do that forever and ever. Amen. And church, that's it. That is Psalm 23. The most well-known psalm in the Bible. And all of that is really introduction for where I want to land things tonight. You see, all we've talked about tonight is just how good God is. Georgie gave her testimony and just spoken to the ways God has blessed her and her family for generations. I spent the last 40 minutes talking about God's nature and his character and how he relates to us as a good shepherd. And church, the only right response to that is worship. That worship is just the right response to a right understanding of God. And so we're going to finish by worshiping. And if you are here tonight and you are in green pastures, can I just say, would you worship like that's true? Would you worship like you've been blessed beyond anything you could ask, think, or imagine? Would you worship God like he actually loves you and cares for you and has led you into those green pastures? And if that is you, position yourself like that's true. Jump up and down. Raise your hands. Make a joyful noise. I think there's even flags somewhere in the room, and if you want to grab a hold of them, go for it. Just make much of God because of your blessing. And if you're here tonight and you're in the valley of the shadow of death, well, I'm not going to expect you to make a ruckus and jump up and down. But again, position yourself accordingly. If you need to fall on your knees and worship God, do that. If you need to go find a quiet place and just sit with God, do that. The church, worship him. Worship him through the pain. Worship him through the suffering. And look, if you need to get baptized tonight and that's your response in worship, the pool's still full. So grab a hold of me. We'll love to partner with you in that. So we're going to worship now. The first song is going to be Psalm 23. It's a new one. If you just want to sit and reflect on that, that's fine. But after that, we're going to sing a couple more songs. I'm just going to invite you, worship God. Move from your seats. Move away from people you need to if that's what you need to do, but just make much of God in this space. So would you join in with me in worshiping our God?